So good afternoon to all of you, and many thanks for coming and joining this event. We are very pleased to welcome you to this symposium on sustainability. I'm Elisabeth Lambert, and I'm going to give the floor to Gwenaël Imfeld, the director of the RISE network.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to have you today. Thank you very much for being here. And I am Gwenaël Imfeld, a research scientist at CNRS and director of the research initiative in sustainability and the environment of the Alsatian. Yeah, now it's working. I would like now to open the opening session, and I just give the floor to Laurent Schmitt, who is the Vice President of Sustainable Development and Social Responsibility at the University of Strasbourg. Laurent, please.
Thank you, Gwenaël. Okay, merci. Dear Deputy Mayor of Strasbourg, dear Professor de Lassalle, dear Gwenaël, and dear colleagues, I would like to thank you very warmly for organizing this conference in difficult conditions with regards to the sanitary situation on a very important topic, which is also crucial for the development of the interdisciplinary RISE network, as Gwenaël said, the research initiative for sustainability and the environment. In a context of climate emergency, increasing environmental and sociological crises, it appears clearly that academic institutions play a crucial role with regards to socio-ecological issues in order to build a more sustainable way of living, as they produce new knowledge which will diffuse to the whole society and educate the professionals of tomorrow. The challenges we are facing are numerous and complex, as you know. They concern our relationship with life and biodiversity, of course, energy and economy, different kinds of pollution which may impact our health and health of other species, of course, solidarity, but also our representation of social success in a context of limited Earth and limited ecosystem capacities. The need for disruptive research has probably never been greater, including conceptual and theoretical approach, which is the topic of this conference. I would like to mention that this conference is part of a strong and unprecedented strategic dynamic at Strasbourg University for the environment and sustainability, especially with the creation half a year ago of for the first time, a sustainability vice presidency. This dynamic aims fostering sustainability in all fields, especially in education, for example, with the signature of the Grenoble Agreement in some months, which implies, among other things, to provide to all students of our university a minimum of 20 learning hours on sustainability. In research, for example, with the creation 1 year ago of the Rights Federation, of course, in the functioning of the different campus of our university, for example, with targeting the sustainability labeling of the university within 2 years, and of also numerous co-construction actions with different socio-economic actors, as, for example, the city of Strasbourg. So Strasbourg University is really proud to support this conference, and I wish to all of you an excellent conference and very fruitful scientific exchanges. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Laurent Schmitt. I would like now to invite Marc Hoffsess, Deputy Mayor of Strasbourg in charge of the ecological transformation of the territory. The speech will be it will be in English.
Now I will try to read without an accent my speech, and je remercie Elisabeth d'avoir pris le temps de traduire ce discours. Dear Elisabeth, dear Gwenaël, dear ladies and gentlemen, members of the Research Network of Environment and Sustainability, I'm very honored and pleased on behalf of Jeanne Barseguian, Mayor of Strasbourg, to welcome you to our city for this two-day conference on the current status of the concept of sustainable development, its content, the progress it has made, and the limits it faces. Unfortunately, my workload will not allow me to participate in your symposium, but the relations that we maintain with the University of Strasbourg in many fields, but in particular on the topics that cover the ecology, will allow us, I'm sure about that, to benefit from their richness and their conclusions. The concept of sustainable development is old. It even emerged before the definition given by the Brundtland Report in 1987 and adopted by the 1992 Earth Summit. In spite of this duration, or perhaps because of it, it is an understatement to say that today it is used in all sorts of ways. As the ecological, climate, energy, and social crises reveal their intensity and urgency, everyone is moving towards certain sustainable development, especially companies and institutions that are primarily responsible for this crisis. Greenwashing and social washing that often go along with it are never far away, and it is becoming urgent and important to re-examine this concept of sustainability, coming back to its original meaning, which consisted of questioning the systemic crisis of a development model that is incompatible with our planetary boundaries. Even if awareness is growing in public opinion and is undoubtedly fueling the emergence of the green vote in France, for example, this systemic crisis still finds few solutions, except solutions that break with the system. And regarding the production and consumption relationships, diverse experiences calling for more cooperation, sharing, links on the scale of rehumanizing raised and reinvested territories. These experiments are based on limited use of resources, on the respect of their renewal life cycles, and on their collective and democratic management as commons. The commons. Perhaps you will debate this concept, but it is important to note the importance of this concept, which has the major interest of shifting the ecological problem of saving the planet to the issue of the survival of humanity. All this to say that the question that brings you together is a burning issue. The concept of sustainable development has been weakened, even though, or perhaps because, it has been appropriated by everyone, and in particular by predatory capitalism, whose ability to capture its opponents is once again demonstrated. As you know, for more than a year now, we have been undertaking public policies in Strasbourg that aim to bring about other models, particularly in the areas of mobility, public space, food, energy, and local democracy. We don't trust the concept of sustainable development. We prefer there is no one in our team who is in charge of sustainable development. We prefer to talk about commons, transformations, ecology, social and solidarity economy, resilience, adaptation, social inclusion, gender equality, etc. All these words can be linked to the concept of sustainable development, but many others as well, such as attractiveness, influence, competitiveness, as soon as the adjective sustainable is added. And that is the problem with this concept. Lastly, we reaffirm the major role played by public actors, giving the impetus of the systemic transformations called for by the crisis we are experiencing. We have the feeling that the weakening of public authorities over the past 40 years has contributed to the weakening of the concept of sustainable development. Relying solely on the markets and on entrepreneurial and capitalist dynamics to build a socio-economic system that is less predatory of our collective resources is a neoliberal fantasy that has done us a lot of harm. It is fortunate that we are beginning to return to it, even if it is perhaps too late. In any case, in Strasbourg, we are determined to give back to public authorities, that is to say, to public money, to public debt, to taxes, to public engineering, the virtuous place it would never have lost to guarantee the preservation of the commons. These, dear friends, are the few thoughts I wanted to share with you in this opening address, hoping that they are not out of harmony with the question that will catch your attentions during these 2 days. 2 days that I wish you intense and rich, and also pleasant to those who have the privilege to be here in our beautiful city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffsess, for setting such a high standard for our future debates. We really appreciate, and be sure this is in total harmony with the work we will do these 3 days. I would like now to invite Marine de Lassalle, who is professor at the University of Strasbourg in political science and director of the SAGE. The SAGE is the main laboratory that contributed to this symposium. Thank you, Marine.
Thank you. Dear all, it's with great pleasure that I have come to say a few words. I will be short. To welcome this symposium, which aims to question very deeply the notion of sustainability in its multiple facets. This symposium shows the importance of social science questions on this scientific field to contribute to the elaboration and circulation of critical knowledge or to the criticism of knowledge, and to contribute also to the construction, the evaluation, and the criticism of the data which measure sustainability. It also underlines how much students and researchers of social science, but also all the leaders and managers we train from them, need to be socialized to the science, their languages, their method, and their solutions. Indeed, I am particularly happy that SAGE is represented within the RISE Federation through many of its members or future members. And I am particularly enthusiastic that this interdisciplinarity between science and social science strengthens the interdisciplinarity of the laboratories that I have the honor of representing. And I would particularly like to thank Elisabeth Lambert and Gwenaël Imfeld, who has worked tirelessly for the holding of this conference, and more generally for this rapprochement between science and social science. I therefore wish you rich and lasting exchanges and an excellent stay at the MICHA, which is hosting us, and in Strasbourg. I thank you and apologize for not being able to be here today, but I have a course this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marine, and thank you very much to all the staff of the SAGE laboratory. Dear Deputy Mayor of Strasbourg, dear Vice President of the University of Strasbourg, dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you to each of you for being here with us today. We are very pleased to welcome great speakers and presenters and to have very nice discussions on this extremely important topic. On behalf of RISE, the research initiative in sustainability and the environment of the Alsatian academic site, I would like to express my warmest appreciation to all of you who generously helped us to make this symposium possible. I would like to acknowledge Elisabeth Lambert, who had the idea of this symposium and designed it so well, Céline Cordier for the remarkable preparation of this symposium at all levels, Laurent Rennes for the artistic performance, and of course the scientific committee of the symposium for setting a high scientific level and quality standard for this event, and the administrative staff of SAGE and ITES. We could not have done it without you. This month marks the first year of the RISE, and we are proud to be able to host this first symposium of the RISE here in this wonderful place with all of you at the MICHA. RISE gathers about 200 researchers and engineers involved in environmental and sustainability research. With RISE, we would like to consolidate the environmental and sustainability sciences within the Alsatian academic site. This initiative emerged from a shared passion for creating a solid basis to strengthen our interdisciplinary research capacities through collective actions. For 1 year, our passion has helped us to unify and mobilize the energy of RISE research units through interdisciplinary workshops and research projects applications around key topics highlighting the specificities and strengths of the Strasbourg's environmental research. Among those topics, we focus on cities in transition, resilience and adaptation to climate change, and the transition for the sustainability of social hydrosystems in a context of global change. During the coming year, we are committed to developing research workshops, joint initiatives, and training events. You are welcome to join. I hope these initiatives will help us to grow up, to be even more reflexive and creative in the field of sustainability sciences. Let me now underscore the aim of this symposium. We are together for 3 days to actively question and revisit the notion of sustainability and how it has been implemented and measured worldwide. This symposium invites us to analyze in depth the evolution of the concepts of environmental sustainability and if and how it serves the well-being of human and non-human lives. Is the current form of our system capable of making sustainable development respectful for future generation something more than the oxymoron it appears? What are the alternatives? How can the concepts of sustainability help trigger the massive and necessary transitions toward a humanity respecting planetary boundaries? Let's be open-minded, self-critical, and inventive. Until Friday, it will be full of fun and learning across 4 great sessions and fruitful discussions and conclusions to define together possibly some recommendations at the end of the symposium. Thank you, and I wish you a very pleasant and useful symposium. I would like now to invite Elisabeth Lambert.
Dear Mr. Hoffsess, distinguished colleagues, students and friends, good afternoon and welcome to this symposium on the concept of sustainability. Let me begin by thanking all our speakers, Gwenaël Imfeld for his unfailing support, and Céline Cordier, who is outside right now, for her huge and wonderful investment for the organization of this 3-day event, also with the help of Fatima Gomis and Asia Hamali from my laboratory. I would also like to thank the kind sponsors of this year's symposium. My research laboratory, SAGE, the FERED, our university through the ITES program, the local and regional authorities, and the doctoral school on Earth and Environmental Sciences. This is the first symposium of a FERED, and I do hope the first of a long and fruitful list of events and publications. I'm very pleased to say that we have more than 90 being registered for physical attendance, many students, doctoral, postdoctoral students, and more than 60 following us online on the YouTube channel of MISHA. I'm really grateful for the interest you show in this topic. As always, we appreciate your support and look forward to your contribution to the discussion and chat. I would also like to remind you that the symposium is being filmed and recorded, as well as live broadcasted on the YouTube channel of MISHA for those who are not in Strasbourg. Many thanks to the engineer that we can see over there, without whom all this would not be possible. We also have a few speakers who could not travel to Strasbourg with us and who are with us on Zoom, in particular for this afternoon session, Mr. Eric Pinault, who is in Canada, but who is already connected with us. On behalf of the organizers, I'm glad to invite you to the art exhibition at the end of the day with our colleague Laurent Rennes, and to the buffet dinner. You are all our guests. This is now time for me to say a few words on this initiative. When I decided to plan this event exactly 1 year ago, my main motivation was to critically assess the implementation in our various disciplines of the concept of sustainable development as defined in the 1987 Brundtland, Our Common Future report. Where has this concept led us? At a time when a change from quantitative to qualitative, or even a profound mutation is necessary, is this concept still relevant? Which other concepts do we need, or other ways of applying this concept? Therefore, I think all of us need to carefully define what we understand when we use the concept of sustainability. I suspect there exist great variations from one discipline to another, from one topic to another, from one society to another, considering legal, political, cultural differences. Having this in mind, our reflection revolves around 4 main sessions, as you can see on the slide. So session 1 will be mainly about the concept, history, and the various cultural approaches we have. The second session is about the evolution of measures and indicators, how to assess sustainability. The third session on Thursday afternoon will be about the implementation within various fields. And last but not least, the fourth session on Friday morning will try to reflect on what we need from now. A revised version of the program is at your disposal on the desk outside the room. So the one which is in your files is an older one. So please, if you don't have the newest one, have it, because there were last-minute changes. The final version is also online for those of us who follow us on the YouTube channel or on Zoom. I wish we all have a most enjoyable and productive symposium, and I declare the symposium open. I would also like to invite my colleague Marie-Claire Pierret, who is going to chair the first half of a session, and speakers of that first session to join us. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everybody. So some practical information. We have a tight and dense schedule. So I will time the conferences. So please respect the speaking time, and I will make a sign 1 minute before the end of the allotted time. This first session is dedicated to the following question: sustainability or sustainabilities, a plural concept. And then many other questions, as what do we mean by sustainability? Do we all have the same definition, the same vision? Probably not. Because the perception of this notion remains strongly linked to our discipline, our background, but also our personal and professional history, or even to our education, our personal convictions and environment, or our readings, our knowledge. So these introductory sessions aims to clarify the plural, dynamic, and vague concept of sustainability. What have been the role of temporal, geographical, cultural, social, geopolitical, economic approaches in the diversity of meanings and representations given to the concept, this concept of sustainability. So it's a pleasure to welcome as the first speaker Mr. Ben Campbell from the Department of Anthropology from the Durham University. So welcome. And the title of your presentation is Human Environmental Sustainability, a critical comparative approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alors, bonjour, je suis tellement heureux d'être ici. C'est ma première fois hors de Grande-Bretagne depuis le Covid, depuis le Brexit, depuis tout ça. Ouais. Mais je pense que je vais lire en anglais. So yes, my approach, I've said, is critical and relational. And I agree, sustainability is indeed vague and misleading. But this could be a weakness and a value too. For all that it too easily means anything people want it to mean, from constancy in economic growth to support for biological and cultural diversity in shared planetary well-being, it is still there after all these years. Here we are debating it as the need for greater sustainability grows ever faster. It is instructive to look at how the concept has been taken up with communities, which communities have benefited from it. Academics, government departments of environment and conservation, ecotourism enterprises, NGOs, and which grassroots communities have managed to engage with the concept or not. At the heart of the problem is a tension between a world of mainstream economic growth relying on technical solutions to matters of evident unsustainability, and a host of lifeways that put mutuality, is that me? Between people, humans, and non-humans at the center of visions for viable flourishing. That's a hack.
Mr. Depalma, please shut down your microphone.
Okay, is that it? So I think at that point I'm going to switch. Oh, sorry, here we go. Yes. Humans, non-humans, visions, connections, ways of relating. What is it, the environment that we're talking about? Is it a mute, dumb object out there, or something with sentience and interactive? It's the broken systems of mutuality that are often not visible to the growth promoters for sustainability and to the top-down sustainability enforcers. While it is relational practices that give some context for reliability of expectation to people in conditions of livelihood, want, and uncertainty. The settlement of sustainability, as I recall when I was doing my PhD 30 years ago, and the sort of build up to the Rio Earth Summit, all this kind of thing, it insisted that if the poor were to be affected by measures of environmental protection, this should not be to their overall disadvantage. And social justice matters need to be recognized and acted upon. So my main argument is that sustainability is broadly a cultural phenomenon in a connective and relational sense. Not in the sense of culture being another pillar to environmental, economic, and social, but culture as what everyday people are doing. Everyday people, including policymakers. What everyday people are doing, thinking, and feeling. Sustainability needs stronger distribution among communities and actors for enabling more widely dispersed practices of innovation in livelihoods of habitability. There's quite an argument in recent years about the preference of concepts like habitability. And sometimes they're putting in opposition to that of sustainability. We should have this discussion. Sustainability was brought in to address the problem we have with relating to the environment. This takes different cultural forms. Human exceptionalism and an objectified environment of resources needs to be put in critical cultural focus. That's what I'm going to try to do with you today. And being an anthropologist, I like to use my fieldwork experience and bring in some other comparative examples as well. So I would argue that culture, for anthropologists, is a method. It's a way of asking questions about difference. So yes, now we have in anthropology a kind of distinct engagement of the discipline with academic work done on its evil twin, so-called development, with its techno-managerial versions of what is sustainable. But it's crucial to understand a much wider set of transformations in society at large that are critical responses to dominant patterns of economy, environmental relations, lifestyle, and consumption since the 1960s. Now, I know if one of the names I saw on some of the original circulations of the people who would be speaking today included Jean-Baptiste Frézoche, he would give a much longer timeline than I'm talking about from the 1960s. He would take it back 250 years ago. Before the co-opting of the term by the UN and development industry, sustainability grew in vernacular, grassroots, and countercultural networks. This was rather lacking in some of the accounts. I'm doing some homework for this talk. I've looked at some. There's a particular book called The Anthropology of Sustainability, edited by Brightman and Lewis. And I thought this was kind of a bit lacking in their account of the concept. I thought it gave a rather partial account of the discipline's relation with sustainability, discipline of anthropology, and it contained no reference at all to the work in particular of Kay Milton. She wrote a book called Environmentalism and Cultural Theory, which I strongly recommend, published in 1996. She was one of the major anthropologists who drew together anthropologists to work on environmental issues, to connect with other disciplines as well, and she seems to have fallen, she left the academic world to go and practice and make a difference in the world. Some of us have stayed within the academic world. So Kay Milton, in her book, she identified 3 principal ways in which a relational embedding of human environmental interactions is notable. This is drawing on the comparative anthropological archive of people's relationships with the non-human environment. And these 3 principal ways she gives us the giving relationship, the reciprocal relationship, and the commoditized relationship. And these different kinds have multiple ramifications for how we think, act, and feel on an institutional and personal level. Climate change is affecting the people I've been working with for over 30 years in the Himalayas. In north-central Nepal, a people called, the language is called the Tamang language. It's an oral, unwritten language for the most part. These people, they now, since compared to when I first worked with them, they now have very frequent winter droughts that make their overwintering crops, wheat, barley, such like, unfeasible. And especially the winter wheat, which they need to offer their house gods before the human inhabitants can enjoy the harvest. They can't even offer food to their gods to keep them replenishing the annual cycles of the seasons and all that kind of thing. The droughts bring attention to changes in patterns of water flows from springs as well. So people are very concerned about the water sources in these drought periods. And I had thought to play you a few minutes of a shaman, a bombo. He is a bombo. Slightly younger generation I have from, he passed away from us. So I have a little bit of a film. Maybe I should pass it around, see if we can post it up later on for the proceedings of the conference. But it's a young man who's chanting ritual phrases over, trying to bring into connection with this water source, which is the one water source which never runs out, and it's got these trickles of water coming down. He's lit a few incensing sort of smoke to bring the gods in connection with the humans. And this divine entity, the spring is a divine entity that brings humans medicine water, menchu. They especially use it for curing eye disease. And this being is communicable through the senses, singing and incensing. Now, this man is not a backward, non-rational thinker. He's actually a very successful mechanic. He can keep an old truck going when you think it's beyond repair. He's a very technically young man. Anyway, I think it's an important point to make that in the anthropological attention to climate change, to sustainability, there's been a lot of interest in the concept of eco-intimacies, how we connect on a personal level, a sensual level, emotional level with our non-human environments. Also, how we connect, how we're attached to the kind of stuff that we've got used to living with in our society of technomass and the smell of our cars and all these kinds of things. So this all amounts to a critique of techno-managerial notions of sustainability that see an objective environment out there in need of protection. For most people living in non-industrial, non-commoditized, close connection with ecologies, they cannot protect the environment. It's the forest, the mountain, the river that protects them and is the major agency in their livelihood. So we've got a whole cosmology of how we implement sustainability, which requires us to be the ones in control, and there's a kind of manageable, objective environment out there that we then act on. Very different context that we're talking about here. And in fact, the author I mentioned previously, Kay Milton, she talks about this really interestingly in her book, Environmentalism and Cultural Theory. So the last thing I want to say in this opening section is that the key principle for most anthropologists is that when we look at big issues in small places, to paraphrase Thomas Eriksson's title of his book, we are grounding the great concerns that occupy us, like sustainability, with the actualities we find on the ground in actually existing communities and in the terms that carry meaning for the people involved. We have to understand why people are doing what they're doing. What do they tell us? Why it is they're doing what they're doing? And why? How do they articulate what they would rather do differently? We need to get into this sense of what's pushing people to get engaged with these matters. So my formative lessons as an environmental anthropologist, before I knew it was for me, this is what I would end up doing, was j'avais 14 ans. Je suis venu en France, en Normandie, et j'ai gagné quelques francs, des vieux francs, oui. J'ai travaillé pour un monsieur dans la ferme. Moi, je faisais le moisson de paille en Normandie. Et là, j'ai appris quelque chose, le savoir local, parce que quand il pleut comme les vaches qui pissent. I don't know why English say it rains cats and dogs. It's a different kind of analogy. It's the Vasky piece. It sort of does it much better. It's a rich sense of climatic experience. It's eco-intimacy, the Vasky piece. Where this is pointing towards is an emphasis on the culturing of innovative skill practice for sustainability and understanding the relational context of learning. This isn't just acquisition of information of how to do things differently, but is transformative of persons taking part. People learn in order to become active persons recognized and respected in socio-cultural terms as having capacities to act in certain ways. So it's not just about getting information about sustainability and putting it all into better data sets and getting compatibility between it. No, we ought to think about how this information has, how learning processes have change effects on the learners, on what it then enables people to do once they have this way of talking, of thinking, of bringing different kinds of aspects of life together into dialogue, etc. Okay, so we're on to our next section, which is called Sustainable Development. An example for the Green Revolution. So I put an exam question to my students when I teach them on courses like Change and Development. And we come on to the Sustainable Development question. I say, is sustainable development about developing sustainability or sustaining development? And they don't always choose to answer that question. It's a bit of a challenge. But in the mid-1990s, anthropologists of development often looked at sustainable development with a great deal of skepticism. For Michael Carney, for instance, in his book Reconceptualizing the Peasantry, he argued sustainable development would mean reduced capacities for raising incomes and lead to trapping the poor in the global south into poverty. It was a sort of sentence that they're not going to develop. Sustainable development meant they would have to rely on local ecological resources, whatever, they would get trapped in poverty. Even if it was to be greener than before. For Arturo Escobar, in his book Encountering Development, sustainable development was a lifeline for the failed project of techno-managerial economic development, which had done so much harm to the capacity of communities with their knowledge systems in the global south to practice livelihoods and inhabit territories in ways outside the framework of development economics. So it's the dominance of neoliberal policy paradigms that has disappointed many people who pushed for that sustainability agenda in the first place. We didn't all know in the early 1990s that we would have these decades of neoliberal dominance. We thought there would be other ways of doing things. And I'm turning now to work by Michael Redcliffe, who in 1987 he published a book on sustainable development, and it's one of the things we all sort of did our homework on to try and get into the new ways of thinking. And this is from a piece in 2005, which he calls Sustainable Development, an Oxymoron Comes of Age. Okay, comes of age. So he says the links between the environment, social justice and governance had become increasingly vague in sustainable development discourses, and the structural relationships between power, consciousness and the environment had become blurred. Redcliffe is attentive to the tension and imbalance between the sustainable and the development sides of the two faces. He says, using the work of the ecological philosophy Andrew Dobson, justice is looked upon as subordinate to sustainability, quoting Dobson. This subordinate position of justice in relation to sustainability is concealed by the language of functionality. And it only comes to light when the win-win relationship commonly found in theories of sustainable development is replaced by a potential win-lose relationship. It also comes to light when examining actual cases, existing places and communities. If you view sustainability as sustaining households and people, he says, then the distribution of resources and rights in them is central to your objectives. If, however, you view sustainability as the protection and conservation of the environment, then justice consists primarily of ensuring it continues to play its vital ecological function. And he concludes in this article from 2005, so there's another 15 years beyond that, which we could think through, but sustainable development needs to take issue with many of the liberal assumptions that influence its adolescence. So I think it's really interesting at the timing of this conference how we could give a life cycle analysis of sustainability and how it's matured, maybe it's kind of routinized, its original charismatic appeal, or interesting way of thinking of things. So there are many case studies which exist in anthropology of how well-intended development projects have deleterious effects on the poorest. So one tremendous example, a study in Botswana, Kalahari community, in fact from experiences of drought also, showed how development projects coming in end up making it harder for the poorest people to activate the networks of connection and entitlement and resilience that exist on the local level, operated in terms of the grassroots. And most of the outside of assistance that came in goes to the bigger farmers, the people with formal land ownership and capitalized technology, etc., etc. So there's a wonderful example of a Kalahari woman. This is in a piece by Jacqueline Solway. This poor woman who claims through her terms of entitlement, which are, she points to these cattle that could do some ploughing, for these oxen who can do some ploughing for her in a time of need. And she calls on the fact that they came from her father's cattle. So there's a sort of longevity, there's in local terms sustainable discourse of making claims, of claiming rights based in the relationship between humans, non-humans, territories and all this kind of thing, but through the language of kinship and the obligations that follow with that. And all this kind of possibility for local resilience is just invisible to the kinds of development projects that come in and just simply want to have a big effect and produce so much more food for the local population. The quickest way to do that is to give assistance to the big farmers, etc., etc. So then thinking more about sustainable development with conservation projects, these often consist in imposing claims to the environment as state property, even though programs, for instance, devolved environmental governance programs. I looked at a big project in India, the Joint Forestry Management System, which was where the Department of Forests was meant to allocate sort of areas of common ground, which maybe had been a bit degraded, whatever. But they would devolve them. They would give them to local ownership to the communities. But the analysis from Melissa Leach and others based at the University of Sussex, the Institute for Development Studies, fantastic analysis there, the article called Environmental Entitlements. It shows how these projects to devolve control and ownership of areas of forest and common land to the local community end up actually bureaucratizing processes that were more sort of sovereign in their own local terms. So the state arrives and transforms the way that the community operates. So, okay, now we're going to go back to my favorite areas in the Himalayas. Nature protection a bit to come here. So, next section's called Let's Look at Himalayan Verticality. Sustainability lost in translation. So one of the key fascinating set of debates and literature about the Himalayas has been concerning ecological niche complementarity, and there are examples, of course, from the Alps in the anthropological literature. The work by Netting, I think, is the most famous of those, but also in the Andes, John Murray's work on the archipelago connection of different ecological niches and all that. There was a great book written by an anthropologist, Robert Rhodes, who worked both in the Andes and in the Himalayas, who argued for using this idea of complementary ecological niches to understand a politics of location for how people can act and connect with other communities. So a relational approach between those who live at different altitudes. So there's a bit of nature protection coming in and telling people, this is now nature, you go off and stay in your villages, you're not allowed to control that environment anymore other than get a bit of dead wood, okay, that's all right, but you're not going to practice any kind of skilled knowledge of how to do things well, like burning, so that when that doesn't happen, the build-up of dead wood becomes, and biomass becomes so much that when there is a fire, it's a huge conflagration. There isn't any more the possibility for small, controlled management of the patchwork. But okay, that's some of the infrastructure that's coming too. And hang on after that. Yes, here we get the niches, the Himalayan verticality. We've got up there, we've got, okay, the valley. This is the top right there is the, top right is the main valley. It's the, it's called the Trisulikola, the Langtang, but in Tibetan it goes up to the town of Kirong, across the Tibetan border. The big pointy mountain, that's the Langtang Lirung, which unfortunately in the earthquake of 2015 dropped a whole side of the mountain and killed 300 people at one go. But it's a major trans-Himalayan route here. It was open through the winter, so even before infrastructures, horses could travel through the Himalayan chain. This is one of only 2 routes in which that was possible. But the people living, the people used to, before the Chinese occupation of Tibet, the people used to go over the other side for the summer pasture with their animals, and then come back on the Nepalese side. And then it sort of, instead of being a sort of long kind of transhumance pattern going on, it then becomes sort of more verticalized from above their village areas, gets more constrained. And so people are growing certain kinds of crops at certain altitudes. At low altitudes you can do intercropping. There's people here doing the reciprocal labor systems. So vital, the relational practice. It's not households doing their own thing at all. It's the most intense periods of work. You have to do it together with your groups. And then there's some ecological limits, like the yak up there, top middle, doesn't want to come too down their slope because they get sick. They want to stay up above about 2,500 meters. But they're breeding up there with the local cows, and it's the offspring that produce so much milk. Well, 3.5 to 4 litres a day, that they can actually make some money from selling to the cheese factory. And you've all heard of the famous yak cheese from Nepal. I think there's now an EU, it's available. They have a license to sell in Europe. If you see it, please remember these people are growing the stuff, growing the herds, etc. So the way that, rather than that relational interconnection of different communities where they all have clan members dotted across the valley, up and down the valley, you can go to any village if you're a local, and you know you'll have people you call classificatory brothers and sisters, and others who are classificatory affines. So it's great anthropology here. It sort of takes us back to Dumont and other people. These are ways, relational ways, that underpin sustainable possibilities and systems of support, calling on others to help out. And no one niche is adequate, is not sufficient for a livelihood. You need to access different niches. The national park comes along, modern conservation ideas, and all of a sudden, not allowed to move livestock unless you own property in another territorial area. They come and control, so they stop the movement of livestock, they stop access for fodder and fuel collection outside your village development committee boundaries. So they're basically imposing a fixed model, a sedentarized model of what a sustainable resource might look like. They fix it in terms of territorial boundaries, and then they establish a membership with rules. Okay, the membership might be allowed to make their own rules, but that's it. The membership have rules of access. So that excludes a whole load of people, including the blacksmiths and so-called untouchable community, who go from village to village, make fire, repair the tools. So they've criminalised subsistence agriculture as an effect, because the blacksmiths can't move from place to place. So it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. But I suppose there's a important point here, which is, oh gosh, time's going on, isn't it? To say that there's this theory of governing the commons from Elinor Ostrom. You're probably familiar with it, and it sort of assumes that there's a fixed resource, and there's a sort of set of rules by which people will calculate their interest to be involved and their interest to protect that ecological resource in a state that will deliver for future generations, all this kind of thing. That idea of an economized rationale for running the commons is not found in the ethnographic record. When David Moss went to look at the Indian water tanks in South India, he tried to see if there was any example where these sort of supposed universal principles of transparency, accountability, all this kind of thing that was promoted for sort of devolved. 1 minute left. Oh my God. Sorry. Okay. That's the point. I'm only about halfway through. So that's an example. That's an example of how the relational gets missed out. Okay, with 1 minute to go, I ought to move on to quickly just run through the slides. So sustainability is a more culturally dispersed, distributed kind of thing and kind of set of values, and it's normative. This is from my local town in the South Pennines in West Yorkshire. We have a community, a town called Todmorden, and these people who, bit by bit, have been taking food sovereignty movement, food initiatives. They're promoting kindness up there. They're trying to do local food, and they're trying to get together and discuss what happens when the flood hits us. We've had 3 floods that should only happen every 100 years, happen within 10 years. Okay, so it's happening on the ground. So the argument is, I think we need to connect with how sustainability has come from movements from below, pushing for these issues to get listened to and for them to get heard. My last example was to go back to Kathmandu, to Nepal, to Kathmandu, where these informal settlers are getting a really bad deal around energy supplies, especially. So I was looking at the idea of energy, sustainable energy transition. Who's bothered to talk to the people like in the squatter settlements, the informal settlements, and what are the energy needs? How do they articulate? How do they announce a sort of common voice for what they see as their problems. And a lot of them don't position it as an energy transition. It doesn't look the same thing as when one reads about so much literature on sustainable energy transitions. When you talk to the really poor, who it's meant to be benefiting, sustainable energy for all from the UN and this kind of thing, that's not the way they see it. But in terms of a more lacking in respect as citizens, as contributors to the local economy, they look after the children, they clean the houses of the rich, the middle classes, and they live in these places where they don't get the legal right to electricity connection. So this is kind of one of the other issues where I think we have to explore what sustainability looks like, what it means, how it can engage. So doing our research project called Energy on the Move, we invited representatives from the informal settlers to come and tell us. And some of them then come out with ideas of, yes, we need training for our women because we're getting short, when they do get an informal line, which they pay too much for, 3 times the going rate, they then get electric shocks. So the all issues of safety and a gendered approach to energy poverty, which need to be taken into account. And I'm sorry I ran out of time. I would love to have spoken a lot more about that. But yes, basically, that's my basic point. It's a general sort of transformative social movement out there which is responsible for keeping sustainability alive. And we need to connect with that in all sorts of different communities around the world. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. We have quick time for some questions around in the room. Do you have questions? Okay, maybe I have one.
Yes.
You speak a lot about the concept of resilience. How far is possible the resilience, for example, if we go by a tipping point or something like that?
Yeah, I'm using resilience. I used it in terms of the energy resilience narratives. We're trying to get a discussion going on. I never used the concept of tipping point exactly.
Okay.
But it's there are critics of the resilience concept who say that it implies too much. It's possible to return to a previous state, that it's bounce back ability. Mm. So having received a shock, we can return. That's, I don't think, capturing the strength. I mean, I do really appreciate the way that Arturo Escobar has discussed a lot of these issues in his book Designs for the Pluriverse. And I think he's paying a lot of genuine attention to the different intellectual traditions, from resilience thinking, transitions thinking, degrowth, food sovereignty movements, all these kind of different ways of articulating that would put, I mean, yes, I'm using resilience in relation to some work going on with climate change in the small island developing states in Pacific and Caribbean as well. And it's using the terms that they're offering us about weaving climate resilience together. Well, that's going to be the next piece that I'll be working on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Questions? Yes.
Please, in the microphone.
I could make the bibliography available.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Excellent.